Some of the common mistakes that a lot of students make, and also I have to admit, I made plenty of them myself. I'd love to go through them with you, so I've written them down so I don't forget them. One of the things that most people don't realise is when we're painting, we need to paint at a certain tempo, at a certain speed. I always find if I try and paint too fast or too strong and powerful and confident, I can easily overdo it. But then the opposite thing is if I try and go too slow and be too careful. So that's why I like to think of it as tempo. A little bit like a marathon runner. When they're starting the race, they don't go flat out. They're more about getting into a rhythm, into a speed that they're running at. And painting for me, because each painting is a bit like a marathon, that's what I like to do. And that's what I like to try and see myself doing. And I almost know, even if I'm not painting well, I'll know that this painting's going to work if I find myself in that lovely tempo, that lovely speed of thought process, decision making. So that's a super important one that most people probably don't think of. So I'll just refer to here. So make sure you use big brushes. Even if you don't like using them, scale yourself up from say a 6 or a 7 or 8 up to a 10. I do love the size 12s. They really do help and allow me to spread and get that paint on the board in place where I want it. But also remember, I'm not putting the paint on the same thickness over every area. So if it's a tree, I will put the darkest, strongest, thickest paint at the base. And the area, say where the foliage is going to go, that's where I'll go thinner because I know that I've got to overwork it. And there's probably nothing harder than working wet in wet. But once you get the balance, the thicknesses of paint, but also we're also timing our painting so that we get the paint tacking up, setting up is what I like to think of it, so that it's just right. And there's some times where I will be thinking, okay, I'll go into this area and I'll put some paint on and think, oh, you know what, that's still too wet. So we still do have that ability to be able to change our mind and come back to it a little later. So remember that I'm also using a fast drying medium. I think the archival lean medium, I think is one of the best mediums in the world. With 30 years of teaching now, I've had the chance not to use every single one, but I do absolutely love it. And when I'm working on bigger paintings, I'll use the classic medium, not the lean medium, as when I'm starting. So for me, that really does help. I think it's a good plein air painting medium as well, even though sometimes I do sort of temper it a little bit so I get that little bit more tacking off time. Because a lot of people sort of think, okay, watercolour, that's the most time sensitive, and definitely it is quite time sensitive, but I think even acrylic is even more time sensitive. At least with watercolour, we can wet that area and get back into it. So they're trying to make acrylics more like oils and oils more like acrylics. So our paint is drying faster, just the window is a little bigger there. So always keep that in mind. And also remember, if we're doing a little country scene compared to say a city scene or an interior, they're all going to take a different amount of time to execute, to finish. So always take that into account. And one of the difficult things if we're working outside, we're normally on a more of a time limit. Not that we want to get home or have our first cup of coffee after we've done our painting, but it's more the light. The light does move 1.5 to 2 hours. That's why I'll get the big shapes in, the big shadows, the things that are going to move the fastest. They're the things that I really want to make sure that I'm getting them almost set in concrete, as looking for a better term. But don't forget, if you've got a big wide scene there, don't think we have to put everything in from left to right, top to bottom. I think editing is super important, cropping that scene down. And I think that's what you learn from plein air painting and drawing as well. I could highly recommend that. That will educate you, speed you up in your decision making as well, and where to crop, what to crop, and how to balance the scene as well. Because that really does then lead into me sort of thinking, you know what, once I've got that in place, the idea in mind, if I'm not then either, if I've got a weak focal point or my focal point isn't working. A lot of times it can be just one edge up against another or a light up against the dark. So I'm always analysing this area of my painting. And that's where I love to think. The DNA to a good day is light to dark, cool to warm, shapes, edges, and then making sure I'm stepping back, getting away from it. There is actually a fancy, I believe it's a Da Vinci sort of measurement, but I normally find about 2 meters, 2 yards, unless it's a big painting. I'll go back more, sometimes 3 to 4 yards, just to make sure I get that global view. We're having to physically work locally, but we need to be able to view it globally. So super important, especially for me. As I get a little older, I don't tend to walk back as fast. I'll just ease my way back, just making sure I'm keeping that image in as clear image in my mind and in my sight as well, because nothing worse than racing back and not being able to see what we're doing. So as the painting's progressing, one of the most common things is we'll have a wall and we'll do all vertical brush marks. Try some diagonal stuff. Try some horizontal brush marks, even though it's a vertical wall. It's that variety, it's that mixing it up is, I think, what helps to make my paintings really sort of work and really sort of sing. But then the other side, which we've alluded to at the start, is the marathon. Most marathon runners or long distance endurance sports people are mentally tough. People probably don't think that we need to be tough or conditioned, but for me, that's what normally allows me to push through and get those best painting of the month or sometimes the best painting of the year, having that mental toughness. Because I'll guarantee you, every painting, there's a hard little area. There's not an easy area, or they're not easy overall. I may get through 80 to 90% of it and think, oh, you know what, I've got this baby really going. It's really cooking. But then I'll hit that little area. And normally, as we go further on, 80% of the day, that's when that mental toughness, clarity of thought, that strength of idea, and the execution really does come through. But I'd love to show you something on my easel as well. So let's come up and take a look at this. The other thing with painting is perception. This painting on the right was painted in 2007. And as you can see, shapes are good, compositions are good. I've got lovely leading in line. It really does come up looking quite interesting. But the one thing now that I put it up against one of a recent painting is how I've over-colorized it. I've used or tried to use color to actually make the painting work, when with a little more insight. That's why I love to work to the scene, where this was probably a more summer scene, which was a little drier, but I was looking for an easy answer to my visual problems. So with painting, the one thing I've learned is there's an easier way, but not easy. So thanks for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. All the best.